All right, morning, everyone. So I'll be honest, I did not have this conference on my bingo card for this spring. I know you all have heard me say for a number of years at this point that, Myles Garrett, he's a foundational player, Hall of Fame worthy, and a homegrown talent that's been here for the decades. And, our intent was to have him be a one-helmet player for his career. And that was the truth. And even to this day, when Myles's, career is over, we look forward to welcoming him back, into the organization. But there are moments, particularly in my job, where, opportunities come up that, quite honestly, are unexpected. And they force you to stop and reevaluate and look at it and say, hey, is this something that could be, really beneficial to the team? And that was the case in this instance where, it got to a certain point where we looked at, what the trade details were. And we asked ourselves, okay, do we hold here regardless of, how, because of how emotionally right it felt? Or do we ultimately make a decision that we think has a huge benefit, to the team in both the short, and long term? I'd always told myself that if, we were ever in a position where we were going to trade Myles, three things would have to be true. Number one, it would have to have short and long-term benefits. Number two, as part of the trade, a young, cost-controlled star at a premium position would have to be included. And the third piece is that there would have to be premium draft capital. And there's a very small set of, deals that really satisfy those constraints. So when it got to the point with our negotiations with the Rams, when, all those things were satisfied, it really, caused us to take a step back and think about, really think about the decision. Jared Verse, he's obviously a huge part of this return for us. Jared is an outstanding football player. Former Defensive Rookie of the Year, two-time original ballot Pro Bowler. He's a perfect DNA match for our attacking front. He's really a terror in both phases, both as a run defender and a pass rusher. And we are really, really excited to add him to our team. He allows us to continue to play defense as a high level, which has been our standard over the past several seasons. And we're really excited to welcome him into the organization. So we're excited about this transaction. It wasn't something that we anticipated, certainly coming into this year or coming into the spring or quite honestly coming out of the draft. But it's a great opportunity for our team, and I know there are a ton of questions, so I'll open it up.
I guess why now, and do you regret not having made this when Myles asked to be traded after 2024?
Yeah, no regret, Scott. And in terms of the why now is just, honestly, the opportunity was too great. It wasn't like a plan A going into the offseason. Quite honestly, we would have operated differently if it was. But sometimes things come across your path that you're not expecting. And you can't be so dogmatic in your strategy and planning that you can't adjust and be flexible to great opportunities.
Were you able to have conversations with Myles leading up into this moment, like meaningful conversations leading up into this?
You say, and let me just, for clarification, Kiam, regarding the trade or just more generally?
Like, I guess both.
Yeah, both. Myles was a good communicator throughout the spring. We obviously talked through the coaching search, free agency, before the draft. He was good in terms of, sharing his travel plans in the offseason, things like that. So that was all very, very normal as he's been accustomed to later in his career. We did not blindside Myles with the news yesterday. Obviously, was a well-tenured member of the organization, someone that, we expect to retire Brown. So he was made aware about a week ago that it was a possibility. And that's a courtesy that, that obviously we owe him. So the communication was good with him.
So you did not consider Myles's absence, travel plans, ghosting, a protest to get out, to leave the team?
Yeah, he didn't ghost. And Tony, no, not at all. I mean, Myles is off-season ritual is pretty consistent the past couple years. And Myles was good in terms of communicating with us throughout the spring. So, no, I know there's been a lot of conspiracy theories with that type of narrative, but, that had zero impact on the trade.
Andrew, going back to the contract restructuring, whatever you want to call it, in the offseason, when you did that, did you, you've talked about flexibility, but did you ever think at that point that you were going to, when you got past June 1st, that this was a distinct possibility, or?
No, I mean, I'd like to sit here and say it was some grand master plan, but it really wasn't. What it did do is, honestly, probably because of a lot that was reported, that is what originally caused LA to reach out and check in, and we said, hey, look, he wasn't available. To their credit, they were really, really persistent, and then really things kind of picked up after the draft.
Are you able to explain, maybe provide a further clarity on why the date was moved back? Because it ultimately benefited you in terms of salary cap.
Yeah, I don't talk about our contract management strategies, as you know, Daniel. I understand the curiosity with it. It's one of those situations where probably the truth is a lot more boring than you all think, but I'm not going to comment on our strategy.
Andrew,
Yeah.
in terms of fans and people thinking that this move means you guys are tanking, what can you tell the fans about that? And then also, a corollary to that would be, does this mean that Denzel could possibly be on the trading block now, or can you address that?
I guess I'd say two things. I'd say number one, all of our goals are still in front of us. We have an excellent defense with really good players at on 3 levels, and Jared, he's an outstanding. He's one of the best players in the league, and so we're excited to have him as a part of our team. To the second part of your question, I guess I'd maybe clarify your line of question, Mary Kay, in the sense that Myles wasn't on the trading block. We weren't auctioning him off. This is not something that was a primary consideration going into the spring.
Andrew, had Myles indicated to you that he'd be open to being traded still?
No, there was no trade request or anything like that. Dan. Obviously, you talked through it a little bit earlier because he did have the no trade clause, and obviously he was pleased with LA, but that wasn't the primary consideration.
He wasn't on the block. You weren't auctioning him off. If there have been reports that this was the only team that you seriously engaged in talks, why not open up the bidding and try to get a few more picks out of it?
That wasn't the goal. That wasn't the goal of Myles. And probably what I mentioned on the onset, if we were to trade Myles, it's a very narrow universe of deals that satisfy it. Everyone wants to have a Myles Garrett on their team, but not everyone can afford that acquisition cost in terms of players, picks and dollars. And so, that was not the intent of any of it.
Andrew, you can.
Let me go here first, and I'll come back to Tony.
Okay. To go back to Mary Kay's question about Denzel, maybe some of the other veterans. There's been so much change, obviously, for them these last few months. Now with Myles gone too, do you plan on having any conversations with them, or do you feel like they know, hey, our goals are the same? Do you feel that there's that sentiment there after a move like this?
Actually, change is commonplace in the NFL, and roster turnover is commonplace in the NFL. We have good communication with all of our players. We obviously, for a move of this magnitude, we communicate directly with them, so they hear it from us and they understand everything that's involved. But we have a good group of guys in that locker room, and we're really excited about the core. Go ahead, Tony.
Some might argue that you received more for Travis Hunter than you did for Myles Garrett. Even if you don't acknowledge that, do you think Myles' age was the one factor that you couldn't get more?
I tell you what, we're very pleased with the return we got, Tony. I think for us, getting a player of Jared's caliber, plus the pick considerations, was excellent. It's something that we certainly didn't expect coming into the spring. Let me go, Zach, and then I'll go to you, Daryl.
When teams called in February 25, what did you tell teams then?
No.
After Myles was the first one.
No. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah.
You weren't doing it.
Yeah, I was like, we're not interested in trading Myles.
Look at where the Rams are in their,
expectations, if you will. A lot of people, say those picks aren't as good because they're likely going to be in the back end of the rounds, and therefore it wasn't enough, even with, Jared. Just what would you say to that? The first, the second, and the third likely could very well end up in the back end of those rounds.
Yeah, I think that I'd say a couple things to that, Daryl. I'd say number one, the combination of picks and players is we think is excellent. We're really pleased with it, short and long term. I'd say the second piece of that in terms of us today on June 2nd, assuming where we know those picks, we all probably have to have a little bit of humility because we just don't know how the season's going to unfold. And probably the third part is, realistically, any team that is making a move for a player of Myles's caliber, they feel like they're in their window, or they are in their window. There's unlikely to be a deal out there where you're getting an expected top 5 pick out of it. Which is why the volume of picks and particularly the inclusion of Jared was incredibly important.
You said that you didn't have this on your bingo card, so I'm just wondering, is there a moment you can pinpoint where it went from being this is never going to happen to this is seeming like it is? The
inclusion of Jared in the deal. Yeah. Let me go, Fred, and I'll come back to you, Tony.
Andrew, I know quarterback's always a topic, but you look at Myles, obviously the biggest asset. You see any way, get the first pick, how that can help you ultimately solve the quarterback issue.
Yeah, I understand and respect, the question. We're way too premature to figure out how we're going to deploy that asset. We've got an entire season to play. We've got a group of players that we're really excited to see this fall. And we'll deal with 2027 and 2027.
That, one of the reasons maybe you delay a little bit to see if you could use that as a chip to get yourself in position?
No, I'd say, honestly, it's independent of any present circumstance, Fred. The return with Jared plus the resources we just felt was too great to turn down. I said Tony next, then I'll go.
Todd Monken came out strongly against pursuing Brendan Sorsby. Mm-hmm. What is your attitude toward the participation in the supplemental draft if he is in it?
Yeah, we haven't had a supplemental draft in a while, or I guess a couple of years now. No different than we do every year. We'll do the work on all the prospects, and then we'll make the appropriate decision for the organization. Let me go, Spencer, and I'll come back to you, Mary Kay.
You mentioned that you obviously have a season to play. How do you kind of square with, I guess, mostly the fan base who see this trade and maybe feel like it's a concession of 2026 and maybe setting Todd Monken up for failure and all that, and just kind of looking more towards the future?
Yeah, Spencer, I think I understand the emotional reaction of Myles. Look, we've known him since he's 21 years old, coming out of Texas A&M. We've seen him grow up here and everything like that, and he's accomplished really great things for us on the field. And so there's always an emotional tie for someone who's going to be one of the franchise greats. So certainly understand that. In terms of the second part of your question, don't see it that way at all. We're really excited about Jared. We're really excited about this defense. I know Monk's really excited about bringing Jared into the organization, but everything's still right in front of us in terms of that regard. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
I think that you could have gotten a similar return for Myles last year, correct?
I don't know, Daniel. We didn't shop him.
I would just ask, do you think the messaging and maybe your actions have been maybe a little bit inconsistent when you talk about adding talent and still wanting to be competitive, and then going away and trading, the best player, arguably in the NFL? Do you think your messaging and maybe your actions have been a little bit incongruous over the past 2 years?
I'd say this. Look, I didn't expect to be up here talking about a Myles Garrett trade, Daniel. This is not my favorite thing to do because, like I said, I didn't have it on the bingo card, and I realize how strong I've been with Myles. But the reality is, when you have an opportunity to do something that has strong, both short and long-term benefits, like we have to be flexible with it. So, we're real excited from a team perspective.
Andrew,
Two questions.
Let me go back and I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Two-part questions. One, I know all trades are tough. Where does this rank in all the moves you've made in terms of emotional tie?
I don't know that I could rank him. Obviously, like, it's tough because it's Myles and I've known him for so long. But the benefit of that is, look, Myles will be a part of, many of our lives beyond his playing career. It's maybe more of a see you later as opposed to a goodbye, to sound maybe a little bit corny. So like that part is tough. But they're all tough because these are human beings. They're not commodities. And their lives change.
And the second part is, what's the value of moving him post June 1st now versus, let's say, a couple weeks where a package from one team and now potentially shop around? Is it just packaged too good to see what other organization could offer?
I guess I don't quite understand the question. You're saying do you mind repeating it so I can try and get it right?
So I understand moving him at June 1st, the money. But if you weren't willing to shop him around, could you have potentially looked later down the road in the summer? Like, why now, yesterday, versus maybe in 2 weeks when, in theory, you could potentially shop him around to get a better offer versus what the Rams gave?
So I think it goes back to two things that I said previously. We weren't shopping him around. That was not the intention to trade him. And then number two, the characteristics that I described in, like, any deal in which Myles Garrett would be included, like, it fell at our feet. And Jared's a big part of that, along with, the draft pick resources. So it's really as simple as that. Go ahead, Mary Kay.
Two-parter here. First of all, a follow-up on Denzel. Last year, when Myles was on Radio Row in the Super Bowl, I talked to Denzel, and he mentioned that if Myles were traded, it would make him kind of question what his own situation was here. So I'm wondering, have you guys heard from Denzel and have reassurance that he's fully on board and committed to the program in the aftermath of this?
So I'd say number one, I think it's probably most appropriate for Denzel to speak for himself. Number two, Denzel's been great throughout the offseason. His communication's been good. He's a big part of the team, and we like him a lot. He's still playing at a really high level. That doesn't change with this transaction.
And then the follow-up that I have there is that how has Jared Verse reacted to the trade, going from a Super Bowl contender to a team that's building towards that right now?
He was very excited yesterday when we talked to him on the phone. He's ready to go. I think he's really excited to play in this scheme. I think maybe some of you already know he's from Dayton, Ohio. Still, his sister's still here and everything like that. But he's gonna be fun. He's a ton of energy now. He'll be some colorful quotes for everybody in this room.
Andrew, well, the quarterback still remains the elephant in the room. Whether or not you have the solution in-house right now is still in question. If it is not, can you still win and achieve the goal of finding that franchise quarterback? Because obviously, the more games you win, the lower you are in the draft.
Yeah, Daryl, I don't love dealing with hypotheticals, especially about the draft when we're in May and haven't played a season. All I can tell you is, like, we're focused on the guys that are in the building. They've had a really nice spring. I'm really pleased with Monk and the staff, and we're excited about the season.
David, in terms of Jared, his two parts, when will he get here, and where do you see the fit? He was listed as a linebacker with the Rams, but was defensive lineman in college.
So expect him to get here, assuming no, travel issues. I guess today's Tuesday evening, this evening. And then you guys should get a chance to see him and meet him tomorrow. I think the blurring of outside linebacker and defensive end, that's really what you're seeing in today's game. He's a perfect fit as an edge rusher for our defense.
Do you feel you're thin depth-wise at defensive end?
I think you could add depth everywhere, honestly, Tony. The roster building process, it's literally every day. And if we can find, guys that we think can upgrade at any spot, we'll look to do so.
Do you feel it also kind of in the middle between the roster, you've gotten the roster so much younger, and we've talked about that, versus doing complete rebuild, right, which might require trading guys like Myles. Do you feel it all stuck in the middle, trying to win, but also trying to redo this roster?
I don't, and I guess I maybe go back to what I mentioned this spring. I don't necessarily agree with the implicit assumption that younger means worse.
You have talked about who Myles was to this franchise and this organization, and obviously your goal is on the football field primarily, but you lose a face of the franchise, a staple in the community. So where do you feel like the roster stands in terms of that kind of player? Do you have those kinds of players to kind of step in and fill those shoes of the role that Myles held, not just in the locker room, but around Northeast Ohio?
Yeah, I'd say this. I think one of the toughest things in professional sports is when players who everyone knows their name locally leave and new ones that they don't know the names of, take their roles. I think, probably could have asked me the same question, with Nick Chubb last year, right? And we saw, Quinshawn come in and make himself a household name in Northeast Ohio, or, David Njoku this year. And, we have Harold Fannin. So I think that, look, professional sports can be cyclical at times. And that's always tough, in these moments. But we are really excited about, a number of the players that we have in the locker room that I think our fans will either continue to get more familiarity with or gain familiarity with over the upcoming season.
Andrew, you talked a lot about Jared and how Jared was sort of the piece that made you do the deal. How long have you sort of, I don't know if covet's the right word, but how long have you sort of been kind of zeroed in on him as a player that you guys really liked? I mean, does it go all the way back to the 24 draft? I mean, just what is it about him that made him just such a swing piece in this?
We liked him a lot coming out. We weren't, really in position to take him, obviously the year that he came out, because he came out in 24. That I would say that probably had less of a bearing on this, this transaction. But, what made it really easy is he's like an outstanding player at 25 years old at a very, very hard to find position. So, yes, we're excited to have him specifically, but it's not necessarily like this was like a 2-year focal point in the making.
And it being an emotional, obviously, decision for you guys as an organization, can you speak at all to the emotions maybe shared with Myles and what his emotions kind of were like in understanding what was kind of happening?
I think it's more appropriate for Myles to comment on that, but what I can share is that it just was a really good meeting. It was bittersweet is maybe the way I would describe it, but I'd probably let him comment on it more than me. Go ahead, Tony.
We remember Todd at his introduction saying Myles was one of the reasons this job was attractive to him. So what was his reaction when you told him you're not going to have the best player in the league?
Yeah, Todd was excited in terms of the deal. He understood the short and long term, benefits. Again, it's not about, not wanting a Myles Garrett on your team. But he's very excited to have Jared. He's very excited to have, the additional resources. And Todd's really smart. Like he understands the short and long term ramifications. And I think, one of the things that's unique about this deal relative to, maybe the other non-QB like superstar deals that come out is that we made a trade with I guess, multiple players and picks. And usually when you make these trades, you're completely trading off present for future. And to get a player like Jared in the deal where the defense still maintains its excellence, that was really attractive to us.
What do you think Jared's upside potential as an edge rusher, as I see, he went from like 4.5 to 7.5. Where do you see that going? And do you feel like with what you have on the team now, you can accomplish the pressure and the pass rush that you want to generate?
Absolutely. I wouldn't sit here and put a cap on any player's ceiling. I just know the list of players that have been Defensive Rookie of the Year and original ballot Pro Bowlers in their first 2 seasons is very small.
Been more of a pressures guy than a sacks guy so far in his career. What is your philosophy on the relationship between those two statistical categories?
Yeah, I'd comment less on that and just say this is a guy who really gets after the quarterback really well.